So COVID has thrown a lot of things up in the air for the athletes training for the Olympics and performing at the Olympics. So if you think about it, the COVID restrictions put on the athletes in the Olympic Village. They're in very small bubbles. They they've got to socially distance from others. Other athletes, even from other countries, and if you can imagine what the Olympic Village was like back in, previously, it would be a social bubble. There'd be social interaction between. There'd be an atmosphere to it. There'd be fans around the place. There'd be from different countries, and there would be the fan zone for in the near the Olympic Village. So you can understand this is all gone. And when this all goes, then the pressure on the athletes, the actual atmosphere goes, and then the athletes are isolated. There's very few people they can converse with or meet up with because of their restrict bubble that they are in with the Olympic Village. So this plays a part on their mental state. And I think for a few athletes, it's worked. Some of the athletes have actually rose to the occasion in terms of the pressure. Other athletes have actually just gone and not been able to benefit from it or not been able to be comfortable in it. And this is something that we've seen in terms of big major athletes. And maybe this might have had an impression on Simone Biles or the bigger athletes, Trayvon Bromell. Any of these athletes, I don't know. We don't know what the main reason for their mental state or why they underperformed or even quit and because of the mental health. But there's sometimes the actual isolation, the restrictions that the COVID restrictions are put on that isolates the athlete, and this plays it changes their mental state, it changes their enthusiasm and their inspiration, and this ultimately affects the body because what's in the mind is in the body, and what's in the body is in the mind. So one reflects the other. So if you've got a mental state that's of isolation, you're not enjoying these restrictions, you feel lonely, you don't feel supported, as it could be the case, then these athletes will underperform. And we've seen from certain performances that it's specifically in the athletes how some have rose to the occasion, some haven't. And the 100 meters was wide open. We don't know, whether, I suppose, supposed to be an unknown winner, although he'd won the European indoors in a fairly convincing time. But the fact is that these restrictions have affected the athletes, and it affects mental health. And if it affects mental health, it'll affect the performance of the athlete in the node. It makes you weaker. Any kind of negativity, any kind of things like that will make an athlete weaker because what you think about really is reflected in the muscles. So we have to understand the COVID restrictions, and it's something that we've got to understand ourselves as kind of athletes in the lower order that probably are never going to get to the height of Olympics, but we've got to understand that these kind of things will come along, whether large or small, to take us off target in life and inside competition. If you think about the delays before a race into the 100 meters, the gun might not work, and then someone does a false start. There's things, the weather, there's delays to the race. These different things take you off line, take you off center, and they're there to take you off center. The power is to actually make sure that you're in the present moment and not allowing these things to take you off center, so you can recognize the response of your thinking to the challenges that come up, whether large or small. So you've got to, the real key is to actually, when you're performing, is to recognize these challenges, recognize these things that are coming off center, and actually stay here and now, use your breathing and be in the present moment, but not allow these challenges, these things to take you off center. That is the real key. Or conversely, to actually be inspired by it, be challenged and enjoy the challenge of these things that come up, and flip it on its head, because that can actually really put you ahead of your rivals in the race if you can actually perform with these little interruptions, these delays. As I say, the gun doesn't go off, or the false start, or you're held on the blocks, or you're held at the start line for 5 minutes. You're held in the call room. These are the different things that can come up that actually can take you off center. And it's the key to actually making sure that we actually stay on center, stay centered, stay in the present moment, using our breathing and feeling our body, taking our mind taking ourselves out of our mind. And this is, you see this, is actually, this is one of the things, if you see the COVID restrictions, the athletes, they find it difficult to take it out of their mind. Everything that's going on, if you can imagine what athletes have to put up with in terms of the pressure they have to be under, specifically Biles, who had to have a huge amount of pressure, but knowing that, you've got a following that are relying on you to perform, that's the height of pressure. And these athletes, whether they like it or not, pressure is a privilege, and with great power comes great responsibility. They've got to learn to stay centered in that respect, and stay, so they can perform in their sport, separate themselves from all that pressure. And that's the height of it. We may actually get these small kind of pressures in terms of the sport, but whenever you get to the heights of them, and they've got a social media following, and they know they're exposed to their fans all the time through social media, that's pressure. And they've got to learn how to separate that from that. They've got to learn how to make sure that doesn't influence and adversely influence their performance. So it's definitely just one of those things that we've got to make sure overall, these things that come off, that challenges that come to us, however big or small, how we react to those challenges is really important. How we accept them, because they're going to come up anyway, is really, really important. And I think that's been exposed in the Olympics today, what COVID restrictions have done to the people, what social media in some ways does to the athletes, and their relationship with social media as well. It brings up all these things where that it's taking them off center, that's taking them into the thought patterns that are negative, and that are not helping them. So as an athlete, make sure you stay centered. In a way, you're lucky enough to actually, if you're watching this, you're lucky enough to actually be not exposed to have that heightened profile, but you've got to stay centered. You've got to stay in the present moment. You've got to use your breathing, stay in your breathing, and keep your mind on what you want to do in the race, but more importantly, where you are now and how you're feeling now.